Hey everybody, today I'm going to go through an exciting tutorial in setting up Stripe Connect. So FlutterFlow has out of the box Stripe payment. However, this Stripe payment is different from Stripe Connect. Stripe payments is when you are receiving the money, while Stripe Connect is commonly used in marketplace businesses where it's commonly used for marketplace online businesses such as eBay or DoorDash, where they take a cut of the transactions. And unfortunately, FlutterFlow currently does not have an out-of-the-box solution for Stripe Connect. So that means that we have to set it up ourselves through API calls. So if you quickly go to the Stripe documentation on Connect, you can learn all about it. So there's two major payments method where firstly, it's like collecting payment and then paying out, or the other one is enable other businesses to accept payments directly. The major difference are highlighted here by the diagram. So here you can see that for the first one, where we are collecting payments and then paying out, the $10 of revenue go through you and then gets transferred to the connected account and so on. And we bear the burden of the Stripe fees. While the other one, enabling other businesses to accept, the $10 goes straight to the external business, which bears the burden of the Stripe fee, and then we get the $1.23 application fee back. Ultimately, what you implement will be dependent on how you want your business to run. I'm going to show you how to implement the second method, where we are simply taking a cut of the application fee, while the connected account bears the Stripe fee costs. In order to get started, there are a few major steps we've got to do. So I'll just quickly go over the overview of what we need to do before we dive into FlutterFlow and making those API calls. The first thing we're going to do is create a connected account. So that's establishing. So this allows users and businesses to set up an account connected to our platform. The second one is linking that newly created account to our platform and making sure they have finished onboarding first before we allow them to accept money. Part 3 is really about enabling the payment methods. This is really admin work. And part 4 is really about accepting a payment. So launching the Stripe checkout when we press pay. And finally, what we need to do is handling post-payment events. So setting up a webhook through Cloud Functions to listen to whether those payments has been successful, so we can fulfill the goods or contact the customer if their payments have failed. So let's get started. Jumping back to FlutterFlow, I've simply used one of the normal profile template and have a button called Stripe Accounts, which navigate to basically this Stripe account setup page, which we'll be using for majority of the tutorial. All the buttons are unconfigured. We'll configure them one by one as we go along. So as I said, the first step is creating a Stripe account. What you need to do first is really have a Stripe account, of course. So go to stripe.com and sign up yourself for a Stripe account. After you created your Stripe account, we need to enable Stripe Connect. So you can easily go to more, and then it was here on Stripe Connect, but my one's here right now. And just go through the onboarding guide in order to have your business set up and enabled for Stripe Connect. And here, if you turn on test mode and go to developer, you can see here the test keys. The API key you have to copy is the secret key here. The first thing we're going to do is set up our API call group in FlutterFlow. And the URL we're passing, the base URL is per documentation, api.stripe.com v1. And then we have authorization in the header. And I'll just copy this out. And then for content type, you need to application URL encoded. And then we can just add group here. Next step, we need to add the individual API call. So remember, the first API call we need is creating an account. So in order to create an account, we need to send a post request to the account's endpoint. We're going to add, let's call this account. And then it's the endpoint we need is /accounts. And then we're going to send a post request. What we need are, according to documentation, the type, the business type, the country, and the email. The body we want to send in the post request is URL encoded, and the parameters are, as I mentioned, the business type, country, and email. I won't explain what they mean, but because it's all listed in documentation. The most important is probably type. We want to create a standard type because this allows other connected account businesses to accept charges and for Stripe to take money away from. This means slightly more work on the business signing up because they need to provide further documentations to get a standard account set up. Back to FlutterFlow, we need 4 variables. The variables are similarly business type, country, email, and type. And they are all going to be of string. Of course, the default value is standard. And set these from variable in the body, business type, country, and email. Let's quickly test this to see if it works. So I'm going to write individual, AU, write email, type is standard. See if this works. Great, we can see here a connected account has been created. So what we need from this instance is the ID. So we just add JSON path on the ID, and let's call this ID. Now the next step is linking that account using account link. So here we need these 4 parameters that we need to pass on to the API. So similarly, you can click here to view the documentation. Press add API call. Let's call this create account link. And the endpoint is going to be account links. It's also going to be a post request. Type URL encoded. And as per documentation, we need 4 parameters: refresh URL and return URL. It's going to be all from variable here. And then we'll add these variables in account, type, refresh URL, return URL. From variable, it's going to be all string. And then move back to the body. We're going to set these variables accordingly. Cool. Let's save this. Let's quickly test this out. So the account we just created, let's test this one we just created. So this is the account ID. Let me just write this down on Notepad. Let's test this out. Type in documentation, we need account onboarding. Refresh URL. This is the URL that redirects the user if the account link expired. And this is the return link. So what is the link you want sent to after they're finished? So I'm just going to use these example ones just to show you, just to run the API call. So here we can see it works. So what we need to do here is add this JSON path of URL. This URL is important because what this URL does is it launches the Stripe onboarding flow for this business. Next, it's important to actually figure out whether the account has been onboarded successfully, because when someone onboards, they might finish or not finish. And we've got to keep checking for that. If they're finished, we are okay. If they haven't finished, we won't let them, we aren't able to let them accept payments. In order to do this, we need to retrieve the account information. So let's add an API call called retrieve account information. It's going to be a get request. And the endpoint we need is of accounts / account ID. But this is actually a variable here. And the variable we need, of course, is account ID. Actually make this exactly the same, of type string. We can add call. We can actually test this as well. So let me just pull out the account we just created. So remember how we created that account link, but I never finished onboarding or even click the URL. So let's test it. And here we get a response. And what we need to look for to figure out whether the account has finished onboarding or not is this JSON path called charges enabled. It's false. You can see I haven't finished. Let's add this as a JSON path. Let's call this account. Let's call it account onboarding finish. Account onboarding finished. Let's quickly go back to the FlutterFlow front end and configure this. Let me quickly show you what we need in the back end in Firestore. Two key fields we need is basically the Stripe account ID, which is that unique Stripe ID linked to that user, which is the connected account ID. And then we also need Stripe charges enabled. Remember how in the last one, the status, this is basically that. So we're gonna set as a Boolean because it's only true or false per the response. So the first thing we're gonna do is for create Stripe account, the first thing we're gonna do is update the document of the authenticated user reference. And the field we want to set first is a Stripe account enable. We're going to set it false. Next, what we want to do is add a condition. I want to condition to make sure that this user actually doesn't have an existing Stripe account already. So it's just a bit of a safety check. So account ID is not set and is empty. Cool. Now, when this user doesn't have a Stripe account, let's make those API calls. So the first call we're going to make is the create Stripe account. So the account API call. And the variables we have to pass are these 4 variables. So business type, I'm just going to write individual. And then the country is AU. And then the email, I'm going to simply use the authenticated users email. And then lastly, the type, which is standard. And I'm going to call this create Stripe account as output name. Now, after that's successful, we want to make a backend call, because remember how the first API responded with a Stripe account ID, connected ID. So I'm going to make that API call and then update authenticated user reference, update that Stripe account ID based on a response of this API call. JSON body, JSON path, ID. Easy. Now the next action I'm going to take is make the second API call, the account link API call. So let's go straight to here, Stripe group, account link. And we're going to pass the variables again, 4 variables. So I'm going to go account as the first one. And then I'm going to type the account ID, which was it now in the authenticated user's ID, because we just made that API update. We just made that backend update. The second one we need is type. The type is account onboarding. The third one is refresh URL and the return URL. But in the meantime, I'm just going to place a placeholder there. I'm just going to use this. Just quickly finish setting this up. So when it's true, what's true, we need to launch the URL. So the account link API comes back with a responsive URL. Let's launch it. I think it's action output. account links response, JSON body, JSON path of URL. Ultimately, you can set whatever you want, like wherever you want to redirect the user to after they've finished or the link is expired. Let's launch it. Ideally, you test this on the published version because it allows you to experience the whole process of onboarding from a business perspective. Okay, now that's loaded. Let's go to profile, Stripe account, and let's try creating a Stripe account. So here, this user does not have a Stripe account. So ideally, when I click create Stripe account, it would set this to false, and then it adds a Stripe ID you can see here. And actually just launched a URL. So although I've pre-populated like an email address, a user can simply continue to onboard. But I'll just stop it here because I want to make it look like I haven't finished onboarding. And how do we check this flow? So what I want to do here is quickly rejig this button to be conditional. So I'll only show this button if the authenticator's user's Stripe account ID is not set. That means they don't have a Stripe account. So if they already have a Stripe account like we just did here, this button won't show it. It won't allow them to create another Stripe account. For the finish onboarding flow, what we need to do here is create the action. So suppose the business hasn't finished onboarding. What we need to do first for this button, just double check. So we're going to make the API call to retrieve the current status of the account. So what we're going to do here is we're retrieving the account status here. So what we need to pass is the account ID of the user. So authenticator user, Stripe account ID. And let's call this retrieve account information. Let's delete this quickly. And then what we got to do here is a conditional. The conditional is the action output, retrieve account information. It's either true or false, whether they've got charges enabled or not. So it's going to be JSON path of accounting onboarding finish. So if it's true, we need to update the existing authenticated users charges enabled field. So the reference we're going to update is authenticated user reference, and of charges enabled, we're going to set this simply to true. Easy. And then we're going to show, maybe just show a snack bar, right? Enable set to true, just to tell us that this is what happened. If it's not true, that means the user hasn't finished onboarding. We need to launch the URL again. So similar to how we've done it for the account link. So you've got to make that API call to account link. Stripe create account link. And the variables, similarly, we're going to pass our account, which is the account ID of the authenticated user. Type, which is account onboarding. The URL and the refresh URL. I'm just going to quickly grab from this previous action. Finish onboarding. And then what we want to do, maybe the action name, we call it continue onboarding. Once we get the response, we want to launch the URL again. The URL we want to launch is going to be from the continue onboarding response. Let's say the user has finished onboarding and gets redirected back to this page. What we don't want to show is this finish onboarding button. So what we need to do here is set a conditional where if they have finished onboarding and the Stripe ID exists, we don't show this button. So let's quickly set a conditional where we're gonna multiple condition again, where the authenticator user's Stripe account ID is set and not empty, and the authenticator user's Stripe enabled is actually false. We'll only show this if they have an account Stripe ID set and they haven't finished onboarding. So we'll show the finish onboarding button. I applied the opposite statement here, which means it's false. Suppose the user finishes onboarding and gets redirected back to this page. However, this finished onboarding will also show, because this flow will only run when someone presses finish onboarding. So what we also got to set up is that when the user finishes onboarding and comes back to this page, we need to check the status. So in order to check the status, make that API call, the retrieve account information API call. The first thing we're going to do here is let's add a condition. And the condition is if the authenticator's user's Stripe account ID is set and not empty, and authenticator's user's Stripe charge is enabled is false, apply the opposite statement. So this means that they have a Stripe account, but they haven't finished onboarding per our database record. Let's make that API call to retrieve the account information. So it's going to be API call, group Stripe, retrieve information, and what we're going to pass is the account ID of authenticator users Stripe account ID, and the output, let's call this check onboarding on load. And let's say if it's true, that means the response is true. That means the user has finished onboarding after they've clicked the create Stripe account button, the first button. Set the charges enable field to true. Cool. So this is basically the whole flow. So we have 3 different actions going on here. So the first one is really creating that Stripe account and launching that URL to continue onboarding. If they're finished onboarding, when they get redirected to this page, we'll check whether they're finished onboarding and update our backend to set this to true. If they haven't finished onboarding, this button will show and if they click it, it will relaunch the URL for them to continue to onboard. So let's quickly test this to see if it works. So per our process, I haven't finished onboarding. So ideally it will only show the finish onboarding button and the payment button, of course, because we haven't configured it. So let's go to Stripe account. Here you can see there's only finish onboarding button. I'm going to click finish onboarding. And I'm just going to continue to onboard. So I'm going to speed through this, and then it will redirect back to the URL that we had originally. This user now has a Stripe account. To actually show it, let's just quickly set an account ID text field where authenticator will just show the ID. In addition, we'll just show whether it's true or false here, just to show you that it has worked. So here we can see that, this user now has a Stripe account. One thing I do note, for safety reasons, you must deploy this as a cloud function. So make private, and whether you want authentication or not to access it, sure. I tell you why right now. This is because it's very important that you hide this authorization token, because if someone has this authorization token, they can access your Stripe accounts, all the information, and make payments and transfers to it. I'll show you how someone from the public can access that information. So let me quickly delete the Stripe account. Imagine this user doesn't ever have a Stripe account. I'm going to quickly turn on developer mode. So go to network. So here I'm going to go to Stripe account, and here we can create the Stripe account from the very start. You see how there's no finish onboarding button because this person hasn't even created a Stripe account yet. So let's click create Stripe account and look at this before it relaunches to a URL. If you look at this exactly, you see these API calls. If you scroll down a little, you can see here the authorization token, because it allows anyone with a front-end access from a client side to access your API keys, allowing them to access your accounts using the API key. you can just go to the group, make the API call private, and I'm going to make required authentication. Deploy this API call. So let's deploy it. And I'll show you what happens after we deploy it. Now that has finished deploying, let's go to Stripe account and finish onboarding. See what happens. Here you can see you can't find that Stripe API call. You can't see the account because it's all hidden under this FF private API call. All the authorization token, everything is hidden under here. So you don't even see it anymore. So this is how you can make your API call safer, especially an API call that relates to payments. I'm actually gonna quickly fix this because this is somehow saying true for the onload page where I'm setting the charges enabled to true when this API call succeeded. It's actually not right. It should be based on the response of this API call. So it should be JSON body, JSON path, and account onboarding finished. To recap, we covered how to create a Stripe account, show the onboarding flow, in addition to making our API call safe. If you'd like to see part 2 about making that payment and enabling other businesses to accept payments using Stripe Connect, remember to subscribe to keep updated.